Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2019, gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Fortenberry, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the recognition. Madam Speaker, as we Nebraskans continue to recover as a state from the massive flooding, so many communities hit so hard, so many examples of neighbor helping neighbor, leadership capacity and qualities coming forward, people pulling together around the ideal of ensuring that the communities have integrity, not of just response, but of recovery. One particular story of heroism has emerged that I'd like to share with you. Mr. James Wilkie, and he's pictured right here, he's a farmer. He was a farmer from Columbus, Nebraska, near Columbus in Platte County. Mr. Wilkie gave his life during the flood. What happened is he got a call from volunteer rescuers of someone who was stranded in a car fairly near his farm by a nearby creek. He jumped in his tractor without hesitation, and here he's pictured. And he sought to help the stranded motorist and the volunteers who were there assisting. When he got to the bridge that was over the creek, water had started to rush over it. The volunteers actually were helping guide him across the creek, and the bridge collapsed. Because he was in an enclosed cab, he couldn't escape. Frantically, the family and others helped search for him. And it wasn't until hours later that he was found a long way the creek, but actually near his home, near his farm. It was as though he was saying, "It's okay, I'm back." I wrote a letter to President Trump recently asking the president to nominate, or to present rather, Mr. James Wilkie the Presidential Citizens Medal. And Madam Speaker, I would just like to read the letter that I wrote to the President. Dear Mr. President, it is my honor to nominate Mr. James Wilkie of Columbus, Nebraska for the President's Citizens Medal. The nation's second highest civilian award recognizes persons who have performed exemplary deeds or services for our country or fellow citizens. A 50-year-old farmer, Platte County farmer, Mr. Wilkie is rightly being heralded as a hero by family and friends and citizens across the Cornhusker state and the nation. A husband, a father, grandfather, community leader, James lived to help others. He died attempting to rescue those in need during the catastrophic floods that hit Nebraska in mid-March. It surprised no one when, on March 14th, James immediately responded to a call from volunteer first responders to help rescue a motorist stranded in the rising floodwaters of Knox Creek near his home. He didn't hesitate. After receiving the call, Wilkie jumped into his John Deere 8100 tractor and headed north on Monastery Road, a route he had taken thousands of times before. As James approached the scene of the stranded motorist, he was confronted by raging water over the bridge that he needed to cross. Emergency responders already on the site tried to guide James and the tractor over the bridge when it suddenly collapsed. The tractor plunged into the water with James inside. James perished in the accident. After a desperate search by neighbors and family and friends, Wilkie's body was recovered downstream 9 hours later on a creek bed near his own farm. He was generous with his time and giving, said a friend. the kind of person that people don't think exist anymore. He would help anyone. A friend of Mr. Wilkie posted this tribute on social media. He said, James was not only a great all-round guy, he was a great family man, and he was amazingly strong in his faith. A true hero who wore a T-shirt, blue jeans, work boots, and drove a John Deere tractor. An online petition has been launched to get James Wilkie the prestigious President's Citizens Medal. One online commentator wrote, quote, "While I don't know this man personally, he represents what Nebraska is all about. Hard work, willingness to help, no matter what it costs you. To be a Nebraska means, within your own hardship, you still give your all to help a complete stranger in need. It means coming together to help our neighbors 2 to 3 towns over because they have lost everything. James represents a Nebraskan doing all that and more by going above and beyond the call of civilian duty and paying the ultimate sacrifice. He shows the nation that we can put aside our selfishness and our pride to help someone else." Mr. President, I second these sentiments. I strongly support granting the President's Citizens Medal to James Wilkie, a good man, simply doing his duty, moved by courage and motivated by love to help another. Thank you for your consideration, Jeff Fortenberry. Something that's not mentioned in this letter is that the online petition to the President for James has reached tens of thousands of people, again, ordinary people hearing about it and simply wanted to do something to commend this finest example of what has really been an attribute of the character of our state, neighbor helping neighbor, and this neighbor giving the ultimate sacrifice. Madam Speaker, I'd like to turn my attention to an opportunity I had this morning before the Natural Resources Committee to actually talk about another Nebraskan who lived long ago, a Nebraskan who will soon adorn the halls here. His statue will be placed in Statuary Hall right outside of these doors. He was Ponca Chief Standing Bear. I was pleased to welcome Miss Judy Gashkabash, the director of the Nebraska Indian Commission, who, with me, petitioned the Natural Resources Committee to begin a process by which we study the feasibility of a trail in Standing Bear's honor and in honor of the Ponca people and the hardships in which they endured. I begin before the committee this morning with these words. No bute we ugate eo kigoshi. Our hands are not the same color. These were the words of Chief Standing Bear as he was on trial in 1879. And what was he accused of in that courtroom in Omaha? He was accused of leaving his reservation to bury his dead son on the Ponca homeland near Niobrara, Nebraska. The Ponca had, even though there were treaties with this tribe, the Ponca had been forcefully relocated from Nebraska to Oklahoma. Along the way, his young daughter died. His son, suffering from the ill effects of this, later was very ill, and Chief Standing Bear promised on his deathbed that he would bury him back in his homeland. So leading a group of Ponca in a very tough winter of 1878, they began the trek back to Nebraska. And he was arrested, and through a series of things ended up in court. And this is what he had to say. Nubute, we ugate, eo kigoshi. Our hands are not the same color. If I pierce mine, I will feel pain. If you pierce your hand, you will feel pain. When the blood flows, it will be the same color. Nubithin, wakodak a ikigo, waksa. I am a man. God made us the same. These immortal words of the Ponca chief so deeply impacted the proceedings. That the court ruled in his favor, and perhaps began a sea course of change of the history of our country. Because what did Chief Standing Bear do? He expressed the inherent dignity and rights of all people, regardless of color or ethnicity. He convinced U.S. District Court Judge Elmer Dundy in such a convicting way. He convinced the judge in an unprecedented move. Now remember, Madam Speaker, this is 1879, and this had been unprecedented. The judge ruled that, quote, an Indian is a person, close quote. An Indian is a person within the meaning of habeas corpus. And so Standing Bear had won his right, and the right of all Native Americans to be recognized as persons under the law. Such a glaring injustice is almost unimaginable to us today in our time. The Ponca chief had prevailed in one of the most important civil rights court cases in the history of our nation. And so in Congress, we continue to recognize Standing Bear's remarkable life and achievement on behalf of his people. And so as I mentioned, Madam Speaker, in a few short months, we anticipate a ceremony here in Statuary Hall where one statue of one Nebraskan will be replaced by another Nebraskan. Each state legislature has the right to determine who is going to be in the nation's capital. Currently, we are represented by Williams Jennings Bryan, a member of Congress, this congressional seat long before me, a three-time presidential candidate, who, again, is right at the entryway of Statuary Hall there. He has held that revered spot for many, many years. And yet, as we think creatively and imaginatively, as our history moves forward, we think about other Nebraskans and other Americans who we can appropriately honor. And so the legislature has determined that Chief Standing Bear ought to now stand in that place of honor for Nebraska and for all Americans, with a particularly special focal point for honoring the first Americans, the indigenous people, the Native Americans. So we look forward to that ceremony coming soon. But I reintroduced a bill as well, Madam Speaker, that directs the Secretary of the Interior to begin a feasibility study for the Chief Standing Bear National Historic Trail, which would basically trace the footsteps of the Ponca tribe along their forced relocation. So again, Madam Chair, the enshrinement of this trail into law with a new statue in the United States Capitol, we will set down a new marker for the remembrance of this great civil rights leader, a reminder of the ongoing need for the protection of human dignity, and a celebration of the possibility brought out by one man's courage. Madam Speaker, as you're aware, shortly we will celebrate Memorial Day. And in doing so, we honor those who gave their last full measure in service to our country. We appropriately stop the busyness to observe and to reflect, to remember. The formal remembrance of our nation's war dead is more than a nostalgic tradition. That a person would lay down his life for his friends, for another, demands that we turn our thoughts to the noblest of human ideals And when we gather together in community, when we gather together to simply say, thank you and remember, we affirm our common bonds as a people. Now, it is not uncommon for any member of this body to reflect publicly on the divisiveness, the anger, the resentment, the seemingly inability to resolve complex problems in a constructive, reasoned fashion that gets fought out in this body and unfortunately is exploited by the media who profits off of this drama daily. This is why Memorial Day and other reflective holidays are so important to us as a people. Of course, to remember our war dead, but also to affirm the common bonds that unite. Before an international gathering of public officials that I attended, someone posed a question. It's a probing question. They simply asked this: where would you like to live? Where people lie, steal, and kill? Or where people are good, trustworthy, and free? And when we consider the full arc of human history, it is often marked by fighting and dying in war. Each generation must face the agonizing and harsh prospect that twisted ideology, egomaniacal ambition, or the hunt for glory will compel small minds to rape and kill and pillage and crush the innocent. Try as we might to create the conditions for goodwill and mutual support, sometimes good Americans must step forward. They must volunteer to bravely protect the ideals that we hold dear. We are coming up on the 75th anniversary of D-Day, June 6, 1944. There will be a bilateral, two-country commemoration by both America and France at Omaha Beach in France, at the cemetery there, where near approximately 10,000 Americans lay at rest. The night before D-Day, the day before this famous photo of the Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower was taken. I happen to know President Eisenhower's granddaughter, Susan, and we were chatting one day about this famous photo, which occupies such an extraordinary place in our history, our folklore, our memory as a nation. And she said, "Jeff, do you know what the president, the general, was speaking about in that photo?" I'd always made an assumption that, again, these young men who are getting ready to paratroop behind enemy lines the day before D-Day were being given a last talk by the general about the need for courage and persistence, the need to think of what it means to be in the face of a barbaric aggressor, the need to fight hard and solemnly to obey orders and to take care of their friends, the need to win the day. That's what I would have thought. That's what I would have guessed. Susan Eisenhower said, "No, you know what the general was speaking about? Fly fishing and football." Now, why would he do that at this critical moment, this moment of tension and fear? Why didn't he do that? What more American thing could he do to remind these young men, many of whom may have given their life, of why they were doing this? To remind them of what they were tethered to home and hearth, and things like fishing and football that represent the activities of community, the liberties we enjoy, the memories from childhood, the peace and tranquility that this country offers. Fight for that. I think that's what he was doing. So I was very amazed and corrected mentally in my impression of this pivotal moment, key moment in America's history. A group of members of Congress will attend the 75th anniversary, and of course the veterans who will be there in attendance are quite old and will be few in number. France will have some awards for a few veterans as well. And it is amazing, in that part of the world, the American flag flies over the French municipal buildings there, because the French in that part of Europe, they do not, they celebrate what America gave. In fact, in August of 1944, Captain Luther Sexton Fortenberry, my grandfather, he left his wife and 2 children, and he entered the war theater. Originally attached to a field hospital or to a hospital unit in England, he moved into the theater of war and was killed in November of 1944 by an explosion. He was killed near the town of Saint-Mère-Église, where some of these paratroopers potentially landed. There, the paratroopers landed in the midst of a German column and had to fight it out right in the town square. To this day, a replica of one of our paratroopers hangs on the church steeple, demonstrating what happened to him. He was actually caught on the church steeple as he came down. He survived the battle. The French there very much commemorate and honor what we gave. My grandfather was initially buried in the cemetery there at Saint-Mère-Église, but they later reinterred in Arlington Cemetery here in Washington, D.C. in 1948. This is how Omaha Cemetery came to be. All of the small cemeteries that were set up during the course of the war, as things were moving so fast, were consolidated into various large cemeteries, again, Omaha Beach being one of our more notable. And families were given a choice. Do you want to leave your loved one in Europe, or would you like to bring them home? Because my own father died when I was young, the direct memories of what happened to my own grandfather are a bit lost in the family tradition. So I've had to do a lot of record searching. I found out it was interesting in 1948 when my grandfather was reinterred from this area of France, Saint-Mère-Église, that his remains were transported through the port of Cherbourg. When I visited Omaha Cemetery, Beach Cemetery, the French civilians who work for us, tending to the cemetery, remembering our war dead, telling the stories of who they are. One young woman, she told me that it was her grandfather who started to work for the Americans in burying our war dead, and that he used to work in the port of Cherbourg preparing the remains of our war dead to come home. And I thought to myself, what amazing confluence of history, that maybe it was this young French woman's grandfather who prepared my grandfather to be returned home. So on the 75th anniversary, we will again remember that great battle, that turning point in the war in which so many lives were lost and so many young Americans came forward to say, I will serve. Memorial Day is a beautiful time of remembrance, and communities all across America will recognize this special day. They will memorialize the fallen heroes of battle who gave us the chance to remain good, trustworthy, and free. It's a precious moment where we unite, where we are unified, where we hold things in common, in gratitude for those who gave in service to these ideals. Beyond this special day, perhaps the greatest memorial we can offer is to do exactly what they did, to think in sacrificial terms about what is nobler and higher, even in the midst of this body, where we have to debate with intensity the philosophical differences in order to construct a reasoned way forward for good public policy and the good of all Americans. Sometimes young people ask me, they say, how do you make a decision? And it's a great question, it's a beautiful question, because they're wrestling with how do you reconcile as a representative of the people what you may believe to be right with what the people are saying. And I tell young people, I walk through a threefold process. The first is, let's look at the evidence here. What does the analysis, the statistics, and other evidence say about what might be the right pathway here? Second, let's listen to the experts or those who are affected potentially by this policy. And third is, you must consult your conscience. What do you believe in your heart of hearts? Sometimes we have and it's hard for young people to reconcile this because sometimes we have a misappropriation of the nature of representative government. The representative, of course, is a reflection of the people who sent him there. And what does he or she owe those people? Right judgment, which means hard work and intellectual discipline around looking at the objective analysis of what can be determined as the outcome of a particular policy. Care and compassion and fairness demands that we listen to people who are affected or who have expertise in the policy. But ultimately, each one of us has to consult their conscience, always hopefully rightfully formed, to make a judgment about what is right, what is good, what is just. And the beautiful gift of where I come from is even if people may disagree, and you give them an answer based upon those three dynamics, they will tell you they respect that. And that is the core of our system. That is what men and women continue to fight and die for. This gift of America, this gift of these ideals, that somehow, with distinct differences and different backgrounds, we find a way to harmonize that which we ought to do. Not just what we can do, but we ought to do. Systems are not perfect. They can be messy and difficult. They can be ugly. But I have always believed that public service is an honorable and high calling. And it's only made possible by sacrifice. Sometimes ultimate sacrifice by those who've been willing to give their all. Madam Speaker, I yield back.